So we're back with lesson 13. So we want to look at compiling. We've used our environment files. What we want to look at doing now is compiling an Angular app for optimization. So there's a command in Angular, the ng build command, and it lets us build for different environments. So the default when we run ng build, the default is it builds for production. But we can also build for development or for staging. But if we don't specify, then it will build for a production environment. So what does building actually do? It does a number of things. It bundles all our files. It removes any white space and any dead code, and it minifies the code to compress it. So the file size is going to be really tiny. And this is advised before we deploy, we should be building. And by default, when we run ng build, it will create a folder called dist and then / our project name. We can override it, but that'll be the default. And once we run ng build, we're going to see a big difference in the file size. So I'm going to open up my front end project for a moment, my client project. So I'm just going to show you don't have to do this with yours, but if I open it in my file explorer, right, the whole project from the Angular CLI, it's big, right? 476 megabytes, and the source itself, source folder is tiny, but we've got, our node modules are huge here. Like that's the bulk of it. Is 300 megs is our dependencies. So our app is going to be much smaller after we build it. So what we're going to do is use the build tool here to generate our Angular front end. We're then going to move it. We're going to copy the Angular front end out of the client app into the server app. So our front end, it's got these view files, which we're not using. We're going to copy the Angular app in here, and then we're going to have to make some changes here about where to find the front end of the website. So we will point this that when the user goes to our root domain, so right now when I go here on my Heroku site, right, it loads the Express front end. So instead, we're going to point it so that our application our front end is pointing to the Angular app that's embedded inside of the server application. So we'll have to make a few changes in app.js to get this to run. So that's the process we're going to build. We're going to move the Angular app, the compiled Angular app into our backend application, and then we're going to change the setup. So this is where we're going. So let's go to our client app. I'm going to open up a terminal. And in here, we're going to run ng build. We could say the configuration equals production, but that's the default. So if we don't specify the configuration, then it's going to build for production, which is what we want. So I'm going to run ng build in my client app. We'll let this run. I can just pause. So it's built index.html. It's given us a few JavaScript files. And now if we look, now here up in the root, we have this distribution folder. So this is all we actually need for our front end. All the rest of this app, we just leave on our development machine. We really only need what's inside the dist folder here. If I go and look in my file system, the dist folder should be tiny, right? Only 296 kilobytes. So our Angular, by building and compiling, that front end is really small. So now what I'm going to do, so I'm going to go into my dist folder, and inside here, go into my, inside of dist, it puts it then, right, it takes the original project name, and then it adds it here. So I'm going to go into dist and open up then the subfolder. I'm going to copy all of these files. Okay. So let's just copy them. It's our one index.html. It's our one style sheet. And then the server-side JavaScript. So this contains all of the TypeScript code that we needed with our Angular client and Angular service. It's all bundled in here. If you look at these files, they're very hard to read, right? This is the transpiling of everything in our Angular component and service. So we don't really have to worry about under the hood. So I'm going to highlight all these files and click copy. And then inside, I'm going to go to my NodeTunes server, and I'm going to go to the public folder. I'm just going to paste all those files in here. So this is going to be the location of the front end of the website. We don't have to put it in the public folder, but it's as good a place as any because the public is designed for static assets. So we won't even really need our views folder. We could probably get rid of it. So now I've got all these files in my server application. I don't really need to do anything else with the client app right now, right? So inside of public, here are now all our Angular files. I'm going to open up the index.html. And I want to check that the paths, so here's my CSS file, right? So all my paths should be local. So it's got our scripts, sources, so these look good, they're all local. And my CSS file, right, they're all in the same folder, so that's good. So this is the only page we want to get served in the browser when our application runs. But if I run my app right now, well, actually my app is still running with NodeMon, I think. If I run it locally, it now actually fetches. So this is good, it's showing me, but we just don't have any data here. So let's see what's going on. So it's loading our index.html. Okay, so now we've got the issue, the same issue we had before with our cross-origin, right? So we're going to have to modify this because in our API, right, we're allowing localhost 4200. But instead, we actually should be allowing our localhost 3000 here. Now let me just think. We could modify our global variable. I think that would work. Ultimately, though, we probably want it in our environment variable. I'm going to change it here first just to see if it works. And if it does, we can then replace. So in my globals file, I'm going to set the client server as localhost 3000 and restart. Bear with me. I'm going to stop my app and restart it. Think I know what's happening. Okay, we do need to make a couple configuration changes because notice it's actually calling our backend API here. I'm not sure why it keeps. And the backend API, okay. We got to make a couple configuration changes. First, I'm going to go to package.json. So right now when our app starts, it actually uses this bin www. This is generated by the Express generator. This is where it sets out port 3000 and starts our server. I want to override this. I don't want it to use this file. I want the actual server to get created and started in app.js instead. So first we're going to go down to app.js. Right before we export it, we're going to start server here rather than in bin www. Because this is going to allow us to run our app differently in production mode and development mode. Right now it's still set to find our API live. So I'm going to set out the port here as our process.environment.port or 3000. And then we're going to say app.listen on our port with our callback. If I use the backtick, running on port So we want our app startup to happen in app.js rather than in the bin folder. And we'll look at why in a moment. By doing this, we can set our app to run either in production mode or development mode when we're testing this out. And so we're declaring our environment port or port 3000, and then we're telling our Express app to listen on port 3000 and start running. We then need to make a couple of changes to our package.json so that we'll have two ways to run the application. We can either run it in production mode or we can run it in test mode. In production mode, it's going to use our live URL. In development mode, it will run everything locally. So in package.json, I'm going to change this start. Instead of calling the bin www, it's going to call our app.js. I'm going to add a second startup script that's start:dev. So when we want to run in development mode, we're going to use nodemon to run our app.js. So if we run this command, if we run npm start, it runs in production mode. If we run the command, a different command, we can run the development version. So let's try this out. I'm going to stop my server Okay, so I'm going to stop my server. So I want to try running it in development mode first. If it's in development mode, then our client server, I'll try it out. To run it in development mode, I'll type npm run start:dev. I'm going to try running it in development mode. So it says I'm running on port 3000 for my app.js, and it says I'm connected. So let's see. Okay, so now it's running locally. But it's still calling localhost 4200. Bear with me, I have to figure out why it's still calling for localhost 4200. Because in our globals file, we don't have localhost 4200 anymore. I'm going to try in a different browser. But there's no, the thing I'm confused about here is there is no reference to 4200 anymore. Yet this is telling me it's still trying to access port 4200. Origin. It says the allowed origin is port 4200. Right, but I'm not trying to call my live API. You're right.
So one thing that I'm thinking is we are asking it if it's in, or we're setting it to think it's in production. Oh no, we're starting it in dev.
We started
There's
it
going to
in
be
dev
some point.
mode. So in dev mode, but in either case, there's no reference to 4200 anywhere.
What I was mentioning before, though, is when you look at the request in the browser console, it still says it's requesting from the live API, which has that old address in it.
Okay.
So it seems to be asking that API, which still has localhost 4200.
Okay, so I think I need to push to GitHub and see. So I will do a push. I think you're right, Adam. Okay. Okay, so I've pushed. We'll give it a second to redeploy. I can see my new version is building. Okay, yes, obviously. It's not fully in development mode because it is, so I have to figure out why that is. But now our app should be working. So I can go ahead and add a new artist. I can update. And if I try it online now, it will also work in. I can add, edit, delete. Yes, NodeMon. It still triggers app.js. So the database still connects. I have to think for just a moment. So it is working live. But yes, locally, not ideal. We probably want to move this rather than read it from the globals file. We should be able to use an environment variable, I think. So we could try that. We'll try and move it to an environment variable. Say client server equals. So here it's localhost 3000. And then I should be able to set this in the Heroku portal. And then we can change our controller. We'll try changing the controller to use the environment variable. We shouldn't even need the globals file anymore. I'm going to try it this way first. I'll comment that out. We'll change this to our process.env.client server. We then got to add the client server as well to the Heroku portal. I'm going to, for the moment, comment out the globals. I'm going to change our allowed origin to our process.env.client server. And then in the Heroku portal, I'm going to make a new configuration variable. Call it client server. And in this case, it'll be HTTPS, node tunes, full stack, .heroku app. So I'm going to use my live URL as the client server on Heroku. So I'll click add. We'll try it this way and see. I will push my changes to Git again. Change client server to env var. Thank you. Not Heroku up, Heroku app. Nice catch. Okay, so I've pushed again. I'm going to stop. Again, I'll try npm run start:dev. I'm telling it locally I'm running in development mode. So hopefully it will read my client server as localhost 3000. That wasn't very successful. No, still reading. So this is going to work live. My environment variable is not quite right. It's not working locally. Here's our environment. It's trying to call our API on the server rather than locally. Okay, I will figure it out. I'm sure there's a small change I need to make. Obviously, something I'm doing with my environment variable isn't quite right. We're close. I mean, it is running on the server, which is good, but my variable's not quite right here. I'm not sure how it's pulling this URL locally because we haven't specified this URL anywhere in our application code. Okay, so what we'll do, I will publish the fix to this and record it once I do, but at least our app is running live now. We've got a single Git repository, right, that contains our Angular front end. We've minified it, we've optimized it for speed and size, and we can run our single page application deployed to Heroku. Okay, so I will let you go. Please make sure I will publish the code and I'll send an announcement once typically I figure this out about 10 minutes after class ends. So I'll look at it, I'll publish, have a good week. And if I have time to do a practice exam, I will do that, publish that for you as well and send it out.